Yeah, a lot has been happening with Drink HRW, isn't it? I know I constantly get lots of newsletters with more research and more research. I'm like, wow, this, you know, like you put a lot of work in. That's all I gotta say. A
Yeah.
lot.
Well, I don't like selling things unless I can fully stand behind them. Right. I mean, I've written a lot like with the hydrogen tablets. I really didn't want to get into the supplement industry, right? Because most in the supplement industry are just completely unscrupulous. Yeah, most supplements don't have any evidence behind them. They don't have any safety behind them. Um, but when we started looking at the mechanisms of hydrogen and how it worked, it only made sense from a supplement side, because if you say pursue it as a pharmaceutical, then that means you're spending, say, $1 billion to target one thing. So say we use it as like a diabetes medication. That means that it would only be able to be used as a diabetes medication, cost $1 billion. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, right? Take it off the market for anyone wanting to use it for, you know, cognitive improvements, or you know, athletic recovery and performance, or even pre-diabetic states where it might even be more promising, like metabolic syndrome and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So based on the mechanisms, we're like, okay, the supplement route is the only way to go. um, let's do it properly. We need to invest in clinical research, you know in the same way a pharmaceutical company would. We need evidence whether this works or this doesn't, so that we can be adapting how we present this based on real hard evidence, rather than just testimonials and endorsements and how people feel. So we modeled the whole company like that. um, and every other product we're launching is kind of based on the same thing. We're starting clinical research on our ageless defense right now. Our first clinical trial is enrolling on that. But that's not like a new molecule, new technology. That's just a formula,
Yeah.
with other ingredients that all have their own evidence behind them. um so we weren't, you know we didn't need as much of our own, because all of them had their own evidence. Now, we spent something like 14 or 16 months. I know I've written it down before, but it's been a few years. We spent a long time, well over a year, looking at all those molecules, looking kind of at the targets they hit, how they work in the body, so that we weren't choosing molecules that were doing the same thing over and over again, or
Yeah.
even maybe countering each other's effects. You see that in a lot of blends. A company will put in, multiple ingredients that all maybe lead to the same outcome in research,
Mm.
but they work against each other, right? So we went really hard to find ingredients that complemented each other, or even maybe provided synergy with each other. So we're doing our first clinical trial there. I know you just got to try them out. We just launched our boost and build, and it was kind of the same idea, right? We spent about a year developing those two products, and I just solicited a lot of advice, from all of the researchers I know in exercise and sports science, right? When choosing those ingredients, right? They really, we picked them to have the best, like, synergy, right? That we could, between two different formulas with three ingredients each, right? And then we dose them, to get the best result. Because you see that happen so often. Supplements will launch, and maybe they have all the right ingredients, but they put them in a proprietary blend, and you look at the total dosage, and it's like, oh wow, this total dosage is lower than any single one of these multiple ingredients should be independently, right? And then they also have fillers in there. So it's like, how much of the good stuff are they putting in, right?
Mm.
And I know why no why like, firstly, no companies dose appropriately is because it's too expensive, right?
Mm.
The price that people are used to paying is set at a certain level, right? um and people expect to pay that price for, say, a pre-workout, or an energy boosting drink, such like that. And then marketing companies want a certain margin, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to make a better product, something has to give. Either your price has to go up dramatically or your margins have to go lower, right? So what we opted to do is our margins are way lower than most companies are willing to take, right? On boost and build anyways. But we got quotes. We got quotes as if we were doing like nationwide, sales for those products as well. And we know that we can get our margins up to kind of the lowest amount that a company like us is okay with. Like, so to give context, most companies start at a margin range, and they start where we're aiming to finish, right? And then when they get big, they're making like, way better margins, right? We started below what most companies are willing to take, and we're aiming to get to where most companies accept at the beginning for margins. And that was just kind of the sacrifice we needed to make to put out good products with, high quality ingredients in the right dosages.
And what's the feedback you're getting from people with the qualities that you're putting out there?
Well, I mean, for build takes a while. Like all the ingredients, they don't work overnight, right? It's creatine, hydroxymethylbutyrate and beta-alanine. So those all take, weeks to build up. So people are just really digging the dosages we're putting in. For boost, people are loving it so far, right? Universally, people are like, wow, like I was like pumped, full of energy at my workout, or that was a fantastic like hangover cure, or like that really picked me up. And they're saying over and over again that it really gets them full of energy without giving them like jitters like an energy drink would. And then they don't crash in the same way, and kind of one of the reasons that we formulated like this. So boost is 200 milligrams of caffeine, right? Which is kind of like having a large cup of coffee. It's 1.5 grams of nitrosogene, which is a, inositol stabilized arginine silicate, right? So most people who exercise know what arginine is, right? Or they know ingredients like citrulline malate. They're to raise your nitric oxide, right? So nitrosogene has shown to raise nitric oxide better, in studies than either plain old arginine or citrulline malate. Even the 1.5 grams of nitrosogene we used, I believe it was versus 8 grams of citrulline malate, improved vasodilation more, right, and blood flow better. But a couple of the studies that have been done in humans on nitrosogene have shown that it improves perceived energy, right? Specifically something called executive function, right? So, attention, is categorized into 3 different domains: alertness, executive function, and orienting, right? Caffeine primarily affects alertness, but also affects executive function, right? Nitrosogene affects executive function in clinical trials, and our hydrogen tablets affect orienting, which neither nitrosogene or caffeine do, right? So between the 3, they're hitting all domains of attention, right? That typically fall down when we're hungover, when we're sleep deprived, all these things. Additionally, we have another clinical trial that's under peer review right now, so it's not published, that showed that our hydrogen tablets had a more robust effect on brain metabolism than caffeine after sleep deprivation. So we put all 3 together, and what it meant is we didn't have to like put crazy amounts of stimulants in. Like you look at some energy drinks and pre-workouts, and they might have 400 milligrams caffeine, 500 milligrams caffeine, and this can make someone super jittery, but then you crash really hard because it gets you ramped up and then you crash. So we used a lower dose, which is still a high dose, like 200 milligrams of caffeine, is about what you want to have in a day for a lot of long-term health benefits to your brain. So that's how we came to that. But then we also put it in with the nitrosamine and the hydrogen, right? And now instead of getting, say, an energy drink that's going to mess up your body, damage your heart, do all these things, nitrosamine and hydrogen have their own health benefits. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the health benefits of hydrogen. Our clinical research continues, to improve, stack up. Nitric oxide, I mean, the discovery on kind of the regulatory role of nitric oxide, in our health led to a Nobel Prize, right? So hydrogen and nitric oxide are both critically important to our health, right? And caffeine is dosed in a way that's led to health benefits rather than harm, right? Because basically for anything, the dose is what matters. If the dose is too low, it doesn't have an effect. If the dose is too high, it can have a harm, right? But if the dose is just right, that's where you're seeing a benefit, right? And that's what a lot of times doesn't get through in education. It's what you've seen, like mega dosing of certain vitamins and minerals, that a mega dose can cause the same harm as deficiency, right?
Yeah.
So we dosed all this appropriately, right? So that not only are you getting a huge uptick in energy, but it's actually beneficial to your health, right? So that was really, really important to us and why we did that. Everything has to be for a reason, has to make sense scientifically. Otherwise, we're not gonna launch it.
That's great. I mean, I think even on the package, it said on the package of the what product is it? Is it the Boost, or it could be the Build, where it's just saying that certain brands have an aggressive name and look to it and stuff like that. But
Yeah, they've got
much of the
flames,
time,
or
it's
flames, or like a skull, or like
yeah,
something like that on them, and say that how hardcore they is. But then there'll be like a prop blend, and you look at the proprietary blend, and the total dose is lower than what one or multiple ingredients should independently be dosed at. You're like, man, what's in this, right?
Yeah.
What's in this stuff, and those are often the products where they put in 400 500 milligrams of caffeine, because then you feel something, right? And people are like, oh wow, this stuff works, I'm jacked up. Well, really, you're just high on caffeine, right? They don't have other ingredients that are helping you work out. And that's a thing about, like, even though Build is the one we designed, right, for performance, strength, recovery, Boost, you look at the hydrogen and you look at the nitrosamine, both have shown, right, to improve athletic performance and recovery, right? And both of them for muscle recovery have shown to improve like markers like creatine kinase, which is a marker of muscle damage. It's a marker of a lot of things, but shows in muscle damage. So both the hydrogen and the nitrosamine, they're going to help you have a better workout. Or if you're not working out, they're going to be better than like power chugging coffee or having energy drinks, stuff like that, for total alertness, total attention, right? Total wakefulness without the crash. But if you are working it for exercise, they're both going to help out your performance, as is caffeine. Caffeine is one of the best performance enhancing, molecules we can take for acute performance. But they're also going to help your recovery, right? And then when you pair it in with Build, I mean, we specifically designed Build to notch off all the categories. I mean, most people have at least heard of creatine, right? Creatine can work to kind of extend your energy output for short type of exercises up to like 2 minutes. It improves 1 rep max. It improves workouts up to a couple of minutes. Whereas beta alanine has kind of worked to show that it improves more of like the mid-range activities, like 4 or 5 minute activities. So they work hand in hand. Whereas HMB, right? Protects against catabolism, right? Protects against, muscle degeneration. It retains, it promotes better, more lean body mass, better body composition.
Can I just interrupt for a sec? It's something that you don't hear about too often. There's a few brands which I know that have introduced HMB, but when it comes to many sports supplement brands, they don't really talk about HMB, and it's quite interesting.
Expensive.
Is I'm sorry,
Expensive.
expensive, right? And that's the reason why. So this is in Build, right?
Yeah.
The HMB is in Build. And Build, is that supposed to be drank as a pre-workout or an intra-workout?
Depends what researcher you talk to, right? Some of the researchers I've talked to said, say with creatine, they like drinking it like spaced out throughout like 6 times a day, right? To keep, levels high all the time. And I'm like, that's just not practical. Nobody's going to do that. Right. So, I know all 3 of the molecules kind of have to build up in your system. They don't work after a single dose, right? There's arguments you can take it right before or right after, doesn't seem to make a huge difference, for most of these when you take it, if it's, immediately before a workout, immediately after, during a workout, because it needs to build up. There might be slight differences, right, in how your body's using and processing it. But at the end of the day, all 3 of them need to build up in your system. Right. So, you need to be taking it ongoing, starting for a couple of weeks before you start seeing a benefit. And then, it's built up in your system. So it's going to be maybe slight differences, but it's not going to not work, if you don't take it at this exact time, right? It's still going to have a benefit. Whereas something like Boost that's designed to work immediately, you want to take that, 10, 15 minutes or maybe half an hour before you start exercise, because you want the benefits of the energy when you're exercising, not after you exercise.
See, most pre-workouts on the market, they would say 15, 20 minutes before workout.
Most ingredients like, hydrogen, nitrosamine, caffeine, they all start having an effect within about 15 minutes. So usually say, take 10, 15 minutes, and then it's hitting you as you start exercising. However, with say caffeine, yeah, it has an effect within say 15 minutes, but caffeine often peaks around an hour after consumption. Right. So it really depends on what activity you're doing. When do you want that peak energy? Do you want it at the end of your workout? Do you want it at the start of your workout? Really depends what you're doing. So you could say, take it 10, 15 minutes before you exercise, and then the energy's starting to hit you at the start, and then you're hitting a peak in energy, maybe, in the middle or the end of your workout. But if you want to do something that is, say you're doing like a CrossFit, workout or like competition, and it's only going to last, 5 minutes or 15 minutes, maybe you want to take it 45 minutes before you're about to compete. Right. Because the question is, when do you want to peak? Right. So in most cases, I'd say 10, 15 minutes. But if you're really in line with what you're wanting to do, then look at when the peak energy is going to be at.
Okay. So Build. It's on the packet, it does say you drink it before you train.
Yeah, we did that. Most people are used to drinking it before they train. Like personally, when I train right now, I'm drinking Build an hour before I train, and then I'm drinking Boost 15 minutes before I train.
Right. And then during training, you're just drinking water or something.
Yeah, I honestly, I usually don't even need to drink anything until I finish training, because I'm usually so well hydrated that don't get a dry mouth or anything as I'm working out, even when it's high intensity. But I tend to drink 6 to 8 liters of water a day. Right. So,
right.
I usually have a few sips of water once I finish like a boxing or kickboxing workout, you know, when I'm after I catch my breath.
See, I'm just thinking about like most people, they're used to having maybe an intra workout, especially people who lift weights.
Yeah.
So when I looked at both of them, immediately I was like, oh, right, this must be the intra workout. But as I started to read it, I was like, okay, so it's not quite an intra workout, it's a pre-workout, a pre-workout before the pre.
Well, you can use build as an intra. You can use it as an after workout, and that's one of those things our marketing figured out. You know, the phrasing just kind of called it a pre workout, but it doesn't matter as much when you take build, right? But if you tell people, oh, take it before or, you know, in the middle or after, sometimes people think, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, because a lot of researchers have strong opinions. No, you definitely need to take it before, or you definitely should take it after, because they've published research on the topic that showed a benefit there. But when you start talking to a lot of researchers and then you start saying, so what difference is it making? What are you seeing? Like the researcher, the you know, sports science researcher I talked to that said, you know, oh, creatine should be taken like multiple times a day, like every couple of hours for best results. And I said, so are you saying it doesn't work if you only take it once a day? And he said, oh no, it still works. It's a little bit better if you take it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So many different researchers have different opinions on this is a little bit better if you do it like this, or a little bit better if you do it like that. And how practical is that? How much better is it? There's debate about it, right? So it's one of those things that it's a little bit uncertain, right? But everyone wants certainty, right? You know, there's that saying, I forget, I think maybe it was FDR or Truman or, you know, one of the US presidents said, you know, can someone get me, you know, a one-handed economist, right? Because, you know, economists were telling them, well, on the other hand, because they were trying to predict what was going to happen from policies, right? And it's kind of the same thing like when you talk to like various researchers, you know, they'll say, well, my stance is here, but then you see another paper that says this, talk to another researcher that disagrees. And then it comes down to, it's like, okay, there's arguments all across the board here, right? It doesn't seem like it makes a huge difference, right? But, you know, to tell that to consumers that don't say, talk to all these researchers every day and maybe start saying, okay, maybe it doesn't matter a whole lot, then maybe that's perceived as weak or not knowing, right? But when in reality, we don't know that well on a lot of these subjects, right?
It could get too
all
complicated for a lot of people, actually. So
yeah, and then I mean, does it matter more for one body type, one age, you know, like certain types of workout? And that's part of some of the problems for a lot of these things, right? It is, what was their methodology, right? So it's not like the science is contradictory, because, and I'm just, you know, this isn't real, I'm just making stuff up. What if one study found taking it, say these molecules were better before, but they were in elderly people doing cardio, and another one found it was better, but they were in like 20 somethings bodybuilders, you know, before lifting weights, right? And you start digging deep into there, and then you look at consumers, and you know that consumers are going to be all over the map with what age they are, what fitness they are, what kind of, you know, exercise they're doing, all these factors, you know, into play. And it's like, okay, well, maybe there isn't universal advice for everyone for this.
Yeah.
Right. You know?
Yeah.
And then it's just way too much to write on a box.
What about essential amino acids? How come you didn't put any essential amino acids in there? Would it be too much, or are you thinking about doing that separately? What's your thoughts?
Well, we're looking into it. You we're looking into doing an amino acid blend, maybe. I still can't get any sort of consensus on the researchers that I work with and talk with on if there's any benefit to a lot of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's potentially in the future, but again, I want to stand behind a product.
Robust research.
Exactly, right. I want to stand behind it, and I'm not getting a whole lot of consensus on strong benefits. And then it would come down to, okay, what is a breakdown? I don't want to just buy a bag of a blend, because that's what most companies do, right? There are these pre-blends of EAAs or BCAAs that they buy from the manufacturer, and you don't get to choose your own breakdown of how they work. Everything we do, we want to design specifically, not just like off the shelf what everyone else is doing. So yeah, it's something we're looking into, but it's not kind of on our immediate radar. We've got a few other products that are in ideation right now. We're looking to launch a couple other things by the end of the year, maybe early 2022. Depends on a few factors, but we're looking to launch one other product for our True Performance line and two others for our True Longevity line.
Awesome.
Right. But again, we wanted to launch Boost and Build. Our goal was in October, and we launched it in March.
Wow.
Right? Because when we launch something, it takes a while, because we put a lot of work into it. Right. We put a lot of thought into it, a lot of work into it. Try and dot every I, cross every T. And get everything done so we can be proud of what we're selling.
Yeah. So you mentioned longevity product. Is that right? Something to. So I remember we had a discussion before, and you mentioned you have an NAD product, which
so we resell that one. We resell that from some friends of mine in a company called Quicksilver. The reason that I sell that one, the NMN Gold, the NAD product, is, they refrigerate their NMN and then put it in a liposome and keep it refrigerated, and they claim good stability. Now, NMN has terrible stability. You can hear David Sinclair talk on podcasts. He doesn't recommend NMN supplements for consumers, because he knows in the lab, if it's not refrigerated, the molecule degrades within like 3 weeks of not being refrigerated with no moisture, right? And he said when it degrades, it can become toxic, right?
Okay.
We're actually in the middle of doing some exploratory work on NMN and how to keep the molecule stabilized for consumers to get a higher dose, because that's one of the downsides of the liposomal delivery is the dose is so low, right? But a lower dose that has some evidence that it could work, it has better bioavailability, so that's like, okay, cool, right? This low dose could work, it's more bioavailable in the liposome, and it's stored cold, so it's stable, right? So with the NAD Gold I'm reselling from a company I'm friends with, simply because I think it's the best product currently on the market, right? Now I'm looking at ways to improve on that, right? Because NMN's a really, really cool molecule, but I'm not just going to just put NMN in a capsule and then put a 2-year expiration date on it when I know that it's going to be degrading in 3 weeks, right? And these manufacturers, what they're doing, is they're relying on the 2-year expiration date that the ingredient manufacturers are given. But those are vacuum sealed bags, right? Those are manufactured in cold rooms with low humidity and put in vacuum sealed bags. As soon as you cut open that bag at a contract facility, and mix it in with other ingredients, put it in a capsule and put it in a bottle that's now not vacuum sealed in a different condition, that expiration date changes, right? But
Wow.
they're just peddling these products, right, without this consideration.
Yeah, yeah. Or
So,
knowing exactly the situation.
and think about this, right? Like David Sinclair talks about research about like, basically reversing aging in elderly mice using NMN,
Mhm.
right? What elderly people do we see that are buying it that are all of a sudden like aging in reverse and getting more energy? Like it's just not happening, right?
Mhm.
Because the dosages aren't the same as that's being used in the research after you convert. When you take a rodent dose, you can't just convert it to body weight, right? There's different metabolic rates, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So you have to do all those conversions, those necessary conversions, figure out what the dosage is, um, and then take it. I know I could be wrong here. I'm just trying to remember because I did this math like a year and a half ago or something. Um, with nicotinamide riboside, right? The other molecule, like
Mhm.
chromadex, I think the studies in rodents tend to use like 1 to 2 grams of NR as a dosing equivalent to humans, but then humans take like 150 milligrams, right? So the human trials have overwhelmingly shown no benefit, right? But it's showing all these miraculous results in rodents. Well, they're using 10 times a dose,
Yeah.
right?
There we
They're
go.
using 10 times a dose. That's but then that gets again too expensive, right?
It's
Companies.
crazy. That's like one product I heard about. It was probably David Sinclair talking about it, and there's one lady, Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Yeah,
She,
I saw actually, and David Sinclair said it a bunch of times, but on Rhonda Patrick, he again mentioned, that 3 week shelf life, in his lab for NMN. But yeah, no, it was, he's been on Rhonda Patrick.
Mhm.
I don't think she's put out a podcast in quite a while, right? I'm on her newsletter. Uh,
Right, right. Um, no, like I no, I generally check out her posts. They're in bite size. Her podcast is just a bit too much for me.
yeah.
Well, it's like she takes one deep breath and then she just goes into all of this stuff. And I'm like, wait, I need to digest what you said 15 minutes ago. Her style is very, yeah, I'm not there yet. But yeah, it's very informative for sure.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and the same thing with anything I say, anything anyone else says. I mean, there's some great content on her site. There's also some things that I've seen that she's gotten critically wrong. You know, things about her, like say talking about like cold exposure because it creates thermogenesis is like basically like an obesity cure. I mean, we just know that that's not the case in humans, right? We've cured obesity in, you know, in rodents by, brown adipose tissue activating thermogenesis with like 100 different ways, and it's not the same in humans. Not even close.
Mm.
Like to generate even a fraction of what the closest we've come to a miracle weight loss cure. I think the molecule is called DNP. It was like a fertilizer used in the 1930s. It's banned. It's still actually kind of rampant in the bodybuilding community because you shed, weight like crazy. It's a mitochondrial uncoupler. Well, it can lead to death, blindness, spoil your organs, right? And researchers I know in this area, like in, bioenergetics and metabolism, just say this is a dead area, right? Like for humans, right? Just because of the differences, in ability to create these, bat tissues between humans and mice. It's just night and day, and just the fragility of humans. So like even if we could do it, it kills us, right? So, and there's not saying there's no benefit here, right? Like say you give one molecule to um, a mouse at a dose and they cannot gain weight, right? Because they just burn through it. And then you give it to a human, even ones that aren't as effective, so they aren't going to kill you. Well, maybe you lose a couple pounds, right? But it's certainly not going to be like a miracle. You can eat what you want and just up your energy and, burn off the weight, through heat creation. We don't work like that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right. But again, there's things that I get wrong. There's things that I've talked about, that I've written about, that I thought I did really good reading on and, had an understanding of. And then I'll talk to another expert that point out an error to me, and I go, oh, wow, that's embarrassing. So that's why I say always double check, even if someone's trusted and they're doing a lot of work and a lot of research, and they seem really excited about something. Always double check. We always have to step back and say, okay, is this true? Right. And this is the topic of a book I'm actually writing right now. I'm about 50,000 words in, and it's the deterioration of truth in society, and looking at it from every angle, breaking down how academia works, right? Now that I'm, publishing papers, filling out conflict of interest, questionnaires and waivers, seeing how the publication process works. I already wrote I think 14,000 words on how the for-profit, scientific funding and publication model works, and it's insane. And I'm adding a lot of content to that too. But then just going into how our information system works, like say even marketing and the news, and not just big data, but even individuals, right?
Right.
How things work, right? From every aspect, from publicists to search engine optimization to marketers to targeting different demographics, all these things. At the end of the day, it's like your publicist wants to just present a story in this way because they think it sounds better. Well, they're like, oh, well, it's true enough, and sometimes it's not even true at all, but they just think it sounds good. And then a marketer wants to present it in this way, right? And then, the SEO guy says, oh, well, we need to phrase it in this way to hit Google's, robot, so they read it in this way. And every single avenue is distorting the actual truth, right, of what you're trying to say or what you're trying to write or trying to do. And all of these people that are working, it's not some big conspiracy. They all truly think it's innocuous, that the change is small, right? But if you have these small incremental changes at every step, the end product can become completely different from what the intended beginning was, right? And then if you have this end product and now you find in your data analysis that, well, that's actually really resonating with this group, and it would probably resonate better if you tweaked everything a little bit more, right? And now as it's refined, as you're targeting certain groups and those groups engage with this or believe that or believe this, you're tweaking to fit your audience, right? And now that's how we create these echo chambers, whether it's in health science, whether it's in politics, because messaging is constantly tweaked to fit in with the narrative that this group you're targeting has shown that they engage with, right? And it's just absolutely absurd. And I mean, this is one of the things, we mentioned, like to pivot and say, talk about sucralose, right?
I was going to come to that in a moment. But as we're here.
Yeah. All I can say is I wrote an article on why we chose sucralose. I can say, I mean, I private label my technology to 50 something brands. I can say some of the biggest natural brands in the world, their food scientists, the PhDs, say to me, oh, I wish we could use sucralose. I'll send them like samples of product like for their home use, and they'll take the sucralose ones personally all the time, but they're not the ones who get to decide. The PhDs in these companies that are evaluating the evidence are not the ones who get to decide their policies. It's the marketing team.
Right, the marketing team. Okay.
Right. So the in most of these big companies that are dictating the messaging, it's not the experts that are defining their position. It's the owners and the marketers, right? So it is far easier to scare someone about something than it is to unscare them. So all it takes is, and it's kind of that natural tendency for us to believe that something that's natural is, going to be better for you than something that's artificial or harmful. I mean, we see this in the, the fireplace delusion, right? People would tend to think a wood burning fire is safer than cigarette smoke or diesel engine smoke. But that's simply not true, right? We know that basically some of the particles burning from wood fires, they can be so small that they avoid our mucal response, right? They're in the small nano range. They just get past it. In fact, a wood fire, right, can be something like 32 times as carcinogenic as cigarette smoke or a diesel engine, but when or diesel smoke. But you tell someone that and they immediately don't want to hear it because they have fond memories of roasting marshmallows on a wood fire. They think, well, humans have been creating fire for tens of thousands of years, right? Like we immediately have a good association with that warmth, that beautiful glow of a fire.
Naturally, yeah.
And to hear it's 32 times as carcinogenic as puffing on a cigarette, right, or parking a diesel engine in your living room, that is just unacceptable for most people to acknowledge, right? So we see this in messaging, right? These messages that hit home, they go, oh, some crazy scientist in a lab doing this, it has to be more harmful than this that was extracted from some plant, right? But we know that there's a lot of hazardous chemicals in a lot of fruits and plants, right? Like get things like pears and apples that have like arsenic and cyanide in them, right? Like look, you can die from eating, what is it, bitter almond. If you eat too many of them, I think it has too much cyanide or arsenic or something, you can die, right? Because it's poisonous levels. We know that there's a lot of plants that are poisonous, that will kill you if you eat them, like especially some types of mushrooms, right, for instance. So we have to look at every molecule from the actual evidence. And this is kind of what I was telling you the other day is I'll tend to take the devil I know over the devil I don't. Right? You look at sucralose. Yes, there's some concerns. It's shown to negatively impact the microbiome, but so has stevia. So has every single, nutritive and non-nutritive sweetener that we've tested, right? From like sugar to non-nutritive sweeteners to everything. The difference is you need 4 to 5 times more stevia than sucralose, right, to get the same level of sweetness. They're both negatively impacting the microbiome. And stevia is also more toxic, right?
I've never heard that. I've never heard that stevia is toxic or affects the microbiome.
Well, I wrote the article and cited a bunch of places, so it's shown it does. So a lot of this evidence sort of coming out that stevia can be harmful too. So you've seen a big switch in the natural industry from stevia to monk fruit, right? And one of the reasons is monk fruit tastes a lot better. I like monk fruit, right? And there's no evidence that monk fruit affects the microbiome because there's no evidence, right? So it's never been studied, right? So there's a difference between absence of harm and absence of evidence. And that's kind of what I was getting into, the devil I know versus the devil I don't. Logically, we can say that all the nutritive and non-nutritive sweeteners we've tested have negatively impacted the microbiome. So it would make sense to presume that monk fruit will as well. Just because we've never studied it doesn't mean there's no risk. Right? We just don't know yet. Now, I'm crossing my fingers for it. That would be phenomenal if monk fruit had no effect, right? But we don't know that yet. So I can't go and say monk fruit is the safest thing on the planet, even though we use a little bit of it in Boost to round out the flavor, because I suspect that it's no worse than any of the other options. You know, they all seem pretty much the same when we look into it. And again, this is one of the things is people will point out, oh, well, what about this with sucralose for stevia? And it's like, okay, well, we've researched sucralose 10 times more than stevia, and it's been around for a lot longer, right? So yes, we find new things that it can potentially do this to say a mouse here or there, right, with sucralose, but behind it, stevia and everything it gets studied in slowly shows the same thing. And again, you have to look at the simple volume, right, of research on the subjects. We can't assume something is safe because there's no evidence that it's done that, because there's no evidence that it doesn't do that. Right? So a new study comes out that says, you know, sucralose does this. Well, okay, so buy stevia instead. Well, has stevia ever been studied for that? Right? Because we know stevia also does this, and this, that, you know, sucralose does it to us. So
let's put that aside. I don't even like the taste of stevia, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Let's look at erythritol and xylitol.
So xylitol we can't use in anything that has hydrogen, like tablets in it, because sugar alcohols, same with the erythritol, anything with all at the end is a sugar alcohol. They actually form complexes with the magnesium. So these sugar alcohols preferentially react with our magnesium to make complexes rather than reacting with the acids and the water. So anything that we have a hydrogen tablet is unsafe, right, to put, you know, these sugar alcohols, you know, in formulation. So that's a big hold up. You know, we could use monk fruit, say, in build, right, instead of sucralose, and we might release a version in the future that uses monk fruit instead of build. Again, we looked at it. There's no evidence that monk fruit is better. There's just less evidence in general around it. So monk fruit is like 10 times the cost of sucralose. So I was looking at that and I'm like, okay, so we'd have to say, instead of like $60 or something that I think we charged for build, we would have had to charge 65. Right. And I said, is this $5 to a consumer worth it? Now, maybe to some it is, because they believe that monk fruit's good and sucralose is bad. But from us evaluating the evidence, can we justify, you know, charging this extra to consumers and basically regurgitating this message when we aren't confident in the science? So it came down to kind of like a decision of ethics and value to consumers, and we felt it wasn't justified. You know, even within the tablets, I mean, we have to use sucralose in the tablets to maintain efficacy of the hydrogen tablet. When we put in, say, monk fruit or stevia, they foam a lot, right? So the tablet creates a lot of foam. They rise to the surface, right? And we've gotten them to stay at the bottom, but then instead of dissolving in 1 minute, it takes 6, right? So instead of getting the equivalent of 12 parts per million, you get like 1.6 parts per million, right? So, you know, 1/8 the dose, basically, 1/7, 1/8 the dose. Well, we also know that hydrogen positively impacts the microbiome, right? There's studies in humans, there's studies in pigs, in goats, in mice, and rats. Across the board, hydrogen has positively impacted the microbiome. We also know that hydrogen works in a dose-dependent manner, right? So if these sweeteners have a slight negative impact on the microbiome, but our hydrogen has a positive impact, should we sacrifice a factor of 8 times in dose, right, to change the sweetener, even if that sweetener has also shown to, like in the case of stevia, has also shown to negatively impact? It just comes at another angle where we just can't justify it based on the science, you know, and this stuff gets quite complicated. I mean, one thing, for instance, red wine has high sugar content, right? Relatively. We know that sugar negatively impacts the microbiome, but red wine positively impacts the microbiome, right? So, the sum of parts is different from each individual part, right? So that would be a new question. Say with our flavored tablets, what does that do to the microbiome, right? Because we know that, hydrogen water, either created through bubbling or especially created by elemental magnesium like we do, we haven't tested our tablets in the microbiome. It's on our to-do list. We've been soliciting researchers to do it, but we know that hydrogen water and hydrogen water created using magnesium positively impacts the microbiome. We know that the sum of parts is often different, right? So even though sucralose, right, could have a slight negative impact on the microbiome, if a hydrogen water has a strong impact on the microbiome, does putting a very small amount of sucralose in change that? And that's a good question. That's what we don't know.
Right.
But then we need to look into it. Does stevia have a different effect? Does monk fruit have a different effect? Right. And this is where things get really, really difficult to gauge and interpret and estimate. Is we need to do these big studies to look at everything, right, that might see slight or negligible differences, and then it's no claims, right? And this is research that, well, nobody does, right? Like, even pharmaceutical companies that spend $1 billion don't do little studies looking at very specific things like this for the most part, right? This is typically done, by researchers that have a keen interest and have funds to do it, right?
Yeah.
We try and cover as many things as we can in our research, but there's only so much funds, and there's only so many research teams that are willing to use their funds as well, right? So there's always going to be questions, and the more research we do, then you have to replicate that research. You have to get different labs to test it and see if they get the same result. It's why science moves so slow.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you're doing a lot of research anyway, even if it means back and forth and trying another lab and then a slight formulation. Okay, we need to send this off again to find out how this reacts with that. And because we've put one extra little element in there.
Yeah, exactly, right? And for people listening, I mean, we've got something like, so we've got 7 clinical trials published, 3 case studies in the preclinical trial, all published. We have 16 other clinical trials that are underway and 4 preclinical research programs underway. But there's a lot of other teams interested in studying our stuff. But then when they tell me their idea and I tell them, well, we have this other clinical trial that's underway that's going to answer this question, then they'll say, oh, let's wait to get the results for that, right? Because, right, they might want to change what they're looking at depending on what's already underway, right? So science moves very slow, right? And depending on the study, the resources they have, one study, it could take a year or 2 years, right, to complete recruitment. And then if the team is busy, right, say personnel leave, say, key researchers go from one university to the next, all of a sudden they have to get new people on the project, causes delays, does all this stuff. And then all the researchers have to agree on the manuscript, right? And then they have to get it published through peer review, right? Sometimes they pick a journal and the journal doesn't have a timeline, and 6 months later it's sitting in a quagmire and peer reviewers haven't looked at it yet, right? Because the editor, has forgotten about the paper. Then they have to withdraw, find a new journal. So sometimes it takes, a year to 2 years, right, to get a paper published even after it's done. There's other bizarre things that happen, like, say for instance, researchers pick one journal because they think it fits good, but they didn't read the scope properly. Well, all of a sudden the paper's tied up for 4 months, and the editor says, oh, well, this paper doesn't really fit into what we publish. And that's not a comment on the paper being bad. It's they picked the wrong journal and now they just wasted 4 months. So now what they have to do is find a new journal, and they have to completely reformat the article, right? Because one journal might say you can have, 60 citations and be within this word count with, this, you know, formatting, this font, this spacing, all these things, and have to like flow it like this. Then the next journal might say, we only allow 40 citations, right? You know, and it has to be structured like this. And like, oh, I have to get rid of 20 citations and remove 500 words, which basically means they have to rewrite the study and then submit it to this new journal to see if this new journal will take it. And it's basically like can be a full-time job for someone on one team to find the right journal and get it, you know, published. So science can move really, really, really slow. And for these reasons, often with hydrogen, I'll talk about certain things and maybe be more confident, and we move in one area. And people ask me, how are you justifying that based on the evidence? And it's because I have data, as do a lot of researchers, that's 2 years old, 3 years old. So I'm seeing a far bigger picture, right, than someone just searching PubMed can see.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. One thing I wanted to ask about was you've got the essential fatty acids on your website as well, like with the omega-3 fatty acids.
You know, and that's we give it away for $2 when anyone buys, you know, one of our premium products. It's one of those things that, you know, omega-3s are critical to our health, and most people, a lot of people that eat Western diets aren't getting the right ratio of, say, omega, you know, 3, 6, 9. They're getting too many like omega-6s and 9s and
it's
stuff.
like about 20-1 ratio or something, isn't it?
Yeah, I forget the exact ratio, but say for instance you eat like, you know, a Mediterranean diet, you probably have no benefit in taking an omega-3 because your ratios are already good enough. But say you're eating like a lot of processed foods, using a lot of the wrong oils in your cooking, you know, not eating, say, like a lot of fish and, you know, stuff like that, you probably need an omega-3 supplement, right? So with these essential products we put on, like the omega-3s and the vitamin Ds, we didn't believe in upcharging them because these are off the shelf items, right? You can get these items from any contract manufacturer, you know, and buy like, you know, 500 bottles or 1,000 bottles for like, by the time we pay for like our labels and shipping to our factory, it's like $2, right? So we give them away at our cost, right? When people buy our goods, you know, whereas other companies might charge $15, $20 for the same thing, or discounters charge, you know, $8, $10 for the same thing. But we're like, it wasn't something that we could feel proud of making a big margin off of because we put no work into it, right? They're what we're calling essentials. And for vitamin D, you know, what we did, you know, is we just decided in the fall, most governments in, you know, most governments in the Northern Hemisphere already recommend vitamin D supplementation during the wintertime, right? I'm not going to say that vitamin D works, you know, to COVID because it's all speculative evidence. It's correlated. There's no good causative evidence, but there's evidence that, you know, vitamin D could do something for COVID. Not for sure, right? We need way better evidence. But at the low cost and the potential gain, and the fact that, you know, in the UK and Canada and the US, we're already recommended to take a vitamin D supplement during the wintertime. I just said, okay, like if we're going to talk about this, I'm not going to profiteer off of it. So with all purchases over $30 on our site, we give a free month's worth of vitamin D. Amazing. Right? So we know that the evidence isn't conclusive, right? But people should be taking it anyways. So that's our you know, free essential throughout, you know, the whole wintertime, you know, and probably for as long as the pandemic continues going, is we're just popping a free bottle of vitamin D.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Really cool. That is amazing. Yeah, I think that's it. That's it, man. I think I got everything I need covered, to be honest, and extras. Is there anything else that you want to mention? Maybe a future plan, unless you want to keep that sort of like under wraps for now.
People will probably be hearing about us pretty soon, in press releases in the news for some of the clinical research we have coming out. So, I mean, I'll obviously keep you posted on all this stuff. There's some really cool stuff on the horizon, but I can't talk about it yet because it's not available. But in the public domain, it's easy to search, like stuff like we don't have the results yet, but our study in the elderly just wrapped up last week, right? Looking at 30 or so, phenotypic biomarkers of aging in a 70 plus population after 6 months use of our tablets. Really crossing my fingers for that one. We've got a lot of research with our hydrogen tablets regarding COVID going on, a couple smaller studies that are finished. I don't want to talk about the results until they're published, but some cool stuff. And we have that big phase 3 clinical trial for COVID that was initiated by a university in France, right? So, this isn't us trying to look and see if this helps, for COVID-19 in a 60 plus population. This is a university. We just, donated some tablets and gave another, small donation so that they could monitor patients for a year after to look at long-term, impacts. But there's something big happening with that. It's actually, the trial is expanding. So again, this is more stuff for press releases that, the universities will have to be involved in to make announcements. So I can't tell more about that until it's available. But
yeah, when could we expect to hear some information on that? When would the results come in?
Hoping the next few months, right, for the phase 3 trial. For the elderly study and the smaller studies, it really depends on how quickly the teams can write the paper and if they choose the right journal. And that's what I was saying. I mean, man, sometimes the same teams will write one paper and submit it to one journal. 2 months later, write a different paper, submit it to a new journal. And, the second paper, maybe they just got lucky in picking the journal or did better work in picking the journal. All of a sudden it's published a month later, whereas the first one gets held up for a year, right? As they have to reformat and pick a new journal and stuff like that, and I've gone through this personally. A paper I wrote, the one peer reviewer gave nothing but positive things about what I wrote. And the second, right, and what I wrote, it was to do with, alcohol intake recommendations and governmental recommendations and how we could be utilizing, biometric data from wearable technologies to form, better recommendations, for people. The guy said that I had a conflict of interest and I sell wearable technology, so nothing I wrote can be trusted. I don't sell any wearable technology and I never have, right? So he improperly looked at, something and wrote this scathing review. And so the editor said, well, the one reviewer was positive, but based on how negative the other one is, we're not going to publish at this time. And I said, but his review was factually incorrect. I mean, it's going to be part of my book, interviewing some of the professors on some of the most ludicrous, things that have been told. I know, one professor I know told me he had a paper, rejected, right, because they said he didn't account for gender differences and he used a computer model, right? Used a computer model. There was no gender, at play. It was just a bullshit, thing that was said to stifle his research. But that's what you get, right? In these 4 private journals, and they're picking often, the editors are often going and finding reviewers that they're friends with. Those reviewers have their own bias. Maybe what you wrote is contradictory to what they publish, right? So they try everything to stifle the research. So it's
are there ways around this?
Yeah, work for Harvard or
Okay.
Stanford or something like that. There's actually been a big problem that some of the biggest journals have started publishing papers, right? As sneak peeks and stuff like that are published and then advertised, but seem to only get published and advertised if the authors are from like prestigious universities like Harvard and stuff. And that's before peer review happens. So one of the big issues in peer review is it's single blind, right? The editor and reviewer know who you are, but you don't know who they are, right? So they can immediately form a bias against you depending on your institution, what you've said. Now they're judging you on where you come from, not the content of your work, right? And in a couple of in the stuff I've tried to get published, I've had overwhelmingly editors email me back saying, you're not an academic, don't submit this. And I said, well, did you read what I wrote? Right. I wrote a book chapter actually recently. It's in press right now. And I was invited by the professor who got the book deal to do it because he recognized me as an expert on the subject. It was on molecular hydrogen. I wrote it. He's the editor in chief, right? He approved it, sent it for peer review. Both reviewers recommended publication and approved it. He approved the final, and then the journal rejected it for the book because I'm from the private sector without a PhD, right? So I actually had to go and get a researcher who was willing to read my book chapter and then put his name on after we did huge revisions so that he contributed. And I had to spend double the time on it to add this other researcher so it had his thoughts and views on it so that the actual publisher, right? Not the reviewers, not the editor, the publisher would accept me because of my background, right? So it's some of the problems. I've got some solutions that I write about. I'm usually not in favor of government, intervening, but I think something like this has to be done by the government. Something like scientific publishing, it has to be. I think there should be tit for tat systems. Review should be completely unblinded. Who is slandering you, right? And it will really mean that, okay, everyone is giving an honest review, because if you never know who the reviewer is that's making these accusations against you, they get away with saying whatever they want.
And they'll feel comfortable with doing that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then you reciprocate. Now all of a sudden it's your turn to review someone, and all the nasty things that have happened to you. Now you lash out, at the next person, right? It's a vicious cycle. But I think the solution to a lot of this is a centralized system of scientific publishing where everyone, if say you got your funds from a government, grant or like various, grant committees, you have to publish in the centralized journal. Now, the centralized journal has the same criteria, right, for formatting, references, all of these things, right, so that researchers aren't having to reformat, rewrite, right, to try and fit into these private journals, that everyone knows what the criteria is. But then, say, for instance, you write a huge article that has 200 citations and 10,000 words, there could be tiers. That means you have to review 2 small articles. So basically, you do it first. You want to publish your paper, and you have to act and do a good job being a reviewer for another paper before yours gets reviewed, right? It just cycles through people like that. So everyone contributes to the review process, before their work gets reviewed. Right? And then it could drop costs. I mean, publishing in some journals, and it comes out of your grant funds, to get your paper published, and then people have to pay for it to read it a lot of the time. The researchers spend all their time doing all the work and then have to pay the publisher $1,000, $2,000, $4,000 to publish their work, right? and then it's stuck behind a firewall. So if you want to read it, now you have to pay $30, $50, $60 to read the paper. And institutions have to pay flat rates to get access to all the papers. And this system is just putting billions and billions of dollars in these for-profit, private publishers. And all that money and time and effort could be utilized for better science.
Absolutely. Wow. When could your book be expected to come out, you reckon?
Ooh, I'm doing a study for the book. It's a questionnaire trying to define various conflicts of interest. I don't want to give info away on what the intent of this study is, because people listening might end up doing the questionnaire, and I don't want to say what our hypothesis is.
Yeah.
Just that I believe there's a problem with how conflicts of interest are defined, within publishing. So we're finalizing that questionnaire. I've solicited psychology professor who writes questionnaires like this to make sure all the phrasing of the questions is appropriate. I am not leading people to answers, anything like that. I'm hoping to get like 1,000 people do this questionnaire, analyze that data, maybe even publish that as a paper, and then include my book. So the book is almost done a rough draft. I'm over 50,000 words in right now, but doing this study, publishing it, refining that, and then just working on it, I'm going to say, if all goes well, no less than a year later.
Right. Awesome. But
So
when that does,
a year now.
Yeah, there's a bit of work to do before that comes out, but when it does come out, we're going to have a chat again. I'm sure there's
really, digging into this, it makes me wonder how we know anything.
I know, right?
How as a society do we know anything, right? When we look at how our information and gathering of truth and reporting of truth is so fractured, but we do. Look at us, right? Look at where we are today as opposed to 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We can obtain knowledge. We can know things. It's just we could be doing a lot better of a job.
I think we have a lot of information now, but we also have too much information. There's a lot of BS which is floating around, and it's we have to just know how to filter through it. And not everybody has a good filtering process. They're like, oh, this is information, it must be correct. If it's on a magazine, on a billboard, on the TV, it's like, okay, this must be the gospel.
Yeah. So, and you watch, my wife likes watching US network news kind of as like, like a soap opera, right? Or like reality TV, like she gets a kick. So for instance, she likes watching Tucker Carlson, right, on Fox, and then Chris Cuomo on CNN back to back, right? Okay. And she'll sit and laugh as she watches it. Like she just gets a big kick out of it. She especially likes it when they talk about each other, right? Because they'll insult each other on the shows. But you can watch, right? And it gets so much worse than CNN and Fox too, right? On both sides of the spectrum. Yeah. But you can watch those two shows in a row. They can be talking about the same issue. And unless you're really paying attention, it's not immediately obvious they're talking about the same thing, because the interpretations of what they're talking about are so polar opposite, right? And there's no similarities. And, it's like neither are the news. They're both opinion pieces that they're interpreting the news to their own agenda, right? And it's so easy for people to say that watch only one side of it on the news every day to completely vilify and dehumanize the other side, right? Because when you see what the other side is saying and doing, and it's so opposite to what you believe, you think that person is either an idiot or evil.
Yes. I was thinking in my head. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, man. It's funny. Well, look, man, this can go on and on and on. I think we done good. We covered a lot today. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah, thanks for everything you do at Drink HRW. I mean, just the one product alone is incredible. The hydrogen water, and now I mean, you've got all these other stuff. You got the bath hydrogen tablets. You got the beauty. You got the NAD, and you know the vitamins, the fats, and all that sort of stuff. And now the supplements for training, and more to come. Like you're doing great stuff, man. So thank you very much for that. So you can be found on Instagram. If you could give your Instagram handle.
Yeah, it's just at drink HRW, right? So HRW means hydrogen rich water, right? So drink
Yeah.
hydrogen rich water is what it is, drink HRW. And that's our website too,
Awesome.
drinkhRW.com.
Okay, okay. Are you on Twitter at all?
I don't know,
You
right?
don't.
I know like we have a social media manager,
Yeah.
and I know he was sort of fixing everything. I mean, I'm not big on social media myself personally. I didn't even have an Instagram until my marketing team told me I had to get one.
Yeah, kind of important. But yeah, Twitter is a good one as well. You know, micro blogging, that's what people are doing these days. So if you're not on there, you know, speak to one of your team to set that up.
Yeah, no, I think we set it up, but then they wanted me to be writing like captions and stuff to like fit with our narrative. And between I'm working on like a handful of like scientific articles right now, some collaborations with teams. I'm working on 3 different books, and it's just I didn't know when I'd be able to actually put tweets out. And I think we just need to find someone that can read enough of my work so that they're not like talking shit that I don't agree with and get
Yeah.
mad at. You know what I mean?
I'll tell you one thing what you can do for now is you can connect your Instagram to your Twitter. So the moment a post goes up on Instagram, it gets posted straight away on Twitter. So at least that way, you know the content which is going on there is
Yeah.
legit.
Okay.
And any extra tweets that you might want to do on top, you can do. But at least this way, you are reaching the people in the, you know, the Twitter space.
Yeah, no, that's I'll let our social media manager know that, because I know he posts on Instagram, but it shares to Facebook too. So I know he
Right.
has it set up with Facebook, but I think we started a Twitter when we hired one social media manager like a year ago, and then she didn't work out. She just didn't do any work, like
Right.
didn't ever start. So I think that never got integrated to our software, but that's a good point. I should let them know.
Yeah, all good, man. All good. So again, thank you very much, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. It's pretty early for you now, isn't it? What 11? What 12 o'clock possibly?
It's 10 right
10.
now.
Okay, 10. Oh right, okay.
I'm going for a hike right after this in like half an hour. So
Lovely. Enjoy, my man. Enjoy.
you have a
Again,
good evening.
thank you. Will do. Will do. You take care, sir.